We are going to have a panel discussion around entrepreneurship, venture funding, and job creation. And all this will be looking around the practical examples from East Africa. Since yesterday, we were learning about the importance of capturing everything that we are doing and learning the art of telling our stories in order to bring in all different stakeholders in order to help each other to push the transformation agenda within our higher learning institutions. So looking forward to this panel, we are going to go deeper in looking at ways how these entrepreneurship ecosystems are going to be supported within our own institutions using examples from different institutions. So to welcome the moderator, allow me to have this honor to welcome Dr. Vincent Ogutu, VC designate of Stratford University.
I won't do the all protocols observed thing. I'll just take it like we're all family here. And we have this exciting topic to discuss today. We're looking at entrepreneurship, venture capital. For those who don't know what that is, you'll soon find out. We're looking at innovation and how we can support the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And we have some really interesting people lined up today to join us on the panel. And I'll introduce them one by one. I want to start with Tony Otoa, who is the Chief Executive of Stanbic Business Incubator Limited. So Stanbic has started an incubator and actually an accelerator that's supporting businesses not just in Uganda where it started, but it's now branched out to other countries. Tony has experience both in Uganda and in the UK in the oil and gas sector. So he supports a lot of SMEs, a lot of small businesses that are trying to develop to support the oil and gas sector. He's worked in the civil society in the UK and Uganda to design laws and regulations that can support the system. So he comes in from multiple angles. He's coming in from the policy side. He's coming in from the finance side, providing capital to these businesses. He's also providing training and support to these businesses so that they can succeed. He has a bachelor's degree in international relations and an LLM in international law. And we're looking forward to the insights that we'll get from him. So please join me in welcoming Tony Otoa. I hope I'll get his name right. It's Philip Gasatura. Now, Philip is the country director for Catapult Africa. I love the name because I used to use a catapult when I was small. And for hunting, not for hurting people. But anyway, maybe I did use it occasionally, the other way around. But the idea of Catapult here is to launch people to the next level. And so Catapult Africa is a venture capital firm that supports businesses really across Africa. And if you go to their website, you'll see some really, really interesting ventures that they have been involved in, doing very high-level tech stuff on the continent. Just like Tony here, he's worked in the UK and in Rwanda. He's been a senior investment person for Citibank in the UK. He managed to develop a team of equity trading in an equity trading platform. He holds an MSc in computer science from the University of Witwatersrand, WITS, in South Africa. BSc computer science and mathematics from Makerere. So he's been everywhere. And he's based in Rwanda. About the only fault that I can find in Philip is that he supports Arsenal. But otherwise, let's welcome Philip to the stage. Because we do have a lady on this panel. This is Lydia Koros. Now, Lydia has a very interesting background. She's the founder and managing partner of Progression Capital Africa. She's been a banker for many years, And then she took that banking experience to start supporting businesses herself. And she does it not just for SMEs on the one part, but she's also got an investment fund that she created that supports startups in the educational sector, which is a very big passion of hers. And she's provided support in the sector in huge ways. She's been the chairperson of the Association of Microfinance Institutions, and she chaired the task force set up by AMFI to lobby for the enactment of the microfinance bill and regulations for deposit-taking MFIs. She's organized a huge microcredit summit in Nairobi, and she's really supported the sector in so many different ways. One thing I'm particularly proud of is she's an alumna of Strathmore and also Viesa Business School, and she's also been a mom at Strathmore. So let's welcome Lydia Koros to the stage. So ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking about entrepreneurship. We've been looking at the growing Africa population, and yesterday some people were saying it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. If you don't get them to do useful things, then it's a time bomb. But if you get them to do useful things, then this could be the silver bullet we've all been looking for that could catapult Africa to the next level. But first of all, I wanted all of you to just give us like a status report. How are we doing as a continent? What sort of challenges are we facing that might need entrepreneurial solutions? Or what are the challenges that we're facing? Maybe I'll start with you, Lydia. What are the problems you see out there that just nag you, like we've got to do something?
Good morning, everyone. Before I start talking about problems, I think it's good to acknowledge that being here is a treat. One of my takeaways yesterday was that if you stay in your mother's house, you don't know other people know how to cook. So for us in financial services, we might stay in our cocoons within financial services, and we don't know what's happening within the higher education space and some of the discussions that are happening. I was absolutely amazed. Well, of course, I'm intimidated being in front of so many professors and doctors, but it was really heartwarming to hear the discussions you have, and especially discussions around integrity, because going to problems, if you ask me what's the biggest challenge that we face in Africa today, and especially for investors who are looking to invest in any space within this, is how do we trust the people that we are putting the money in the hands of? So the fact that this is a topical discussion for you at this point is already, starting to address that problem. Then the other problem that we can say we are seeing in the space is talent. Because you don't necessarily invest in a business, you invest in people. So having the right skills, not just the entrepreneurial skills, but the talent that then goes ahead and supports this entrepreneur in achieving the
the reason why some are doing poorly lies or goes back to leadership. So that's a very, very interesting and fundamental problem that I think we need to really be inconveniently truthful about, especially when we're having these conversations. Because the more we mask it, the more we ignore it, the less we're dealing with it. That's number one. Number two, people. We do have people in Africa. Every single day, countries' populations are growing. But are we deploying these people in the right places? Are we, the keynote speaker yesterday talked about fit to purpose. When we're talking about deployment, are we creating people or making people that are fit to purpose and deployed to create value? Or are we just churning out and creating stories around numbers? Someone was talking about trace studies. Trace studies are important because you will say, yes, we trained 1,000 people, 50 people went through my institution. But are they rightly deployed? Are they out gaining rightful employment, which creates impact in not just our societies, but in the economy? Because when you couple all of those two things, people, the right deployment, leadership, then you see where we can start working around the solutions. Thank you.
I'm loving this discussion. So these venture capitalists, they're not talking about money. The number one problems they're talking about are all to do with people and our governance, our honesty, systems like that. Philip, what's your take on the problems we're really facing now in Africa?
Well, first, good morning to everyone. I think one thing I learned very early in my career is work with people smarter than you. So I'm glad to be in a room with very smart people. So hopefully, whatever little I have learned, I'll be able to share with you. But I think I'll touch on what Lydia said and also what Tony said. It's talent. We see it in our line of work, where you see very young, excitable talent come out of universities or starting certain ideas. But the talent, when you put it at par with, because Africa is no longer competing against Africa. You're competing, someone coming out of Macaire, which I am from, you're competing with Australia, you're competing with Indonesia, you're competing with the US, you're competing with Mexico. The world has become so small. I like to say the biggest university today is YouTube, because people learn so much. It is how we're keeping up with that. What are we learning from other peers? Unfortunately, when we see what comes through us is the talent, the ability to compete at that level. When you look at, some research has been done in terms of the man-hour efficiency of someone here in Rwanda versus, say, maybe in Kenya, versus, say, maybe in India. The efficiency, and that's why a lot of those that work still goes to those resources. So it really is down to talent. But I won't fault it only to talent, because talent only grows to what the market demands of it. I'm not going to study so much or get efficient in something, let's say in bioinformatics, and I can't sell that anywhere in my local economy. So the market has not yet grown to demand of that. And that's why, unfortunately today, you see a lot of good talent leaving the continent. And that's talent that we need right here, because the market has not. And that market issue, I think, is down to the leadership. How do we build? How do we deploy our economies? Where is it needed? And so that, to me, is where I'll start. It's the talent.
I hope you're all trying to see how you can plug into this conversation. So Philip's talking about talent. That's the business most of us are involved in here, taking talent to the next level, preparing them. But then he's pointing out that sometimes after we've done a good job preparing them, then they take off because there are no opportunities in Africa. So they go where they can find opportunities. But that's crazy, because precisely entrepreneurship should spot and take those opportunities and keep them here. So we need to know how to reverse this process, and also how to make them fit for purpose. This has come up twice already in today's conversation. Now, I'm a big believer in the hope that Africa has, and I'm sure it's not like we just woke up today and this conversation started. I'm sure the entrepreneurs you're meeting are already trying to address some of these problems. What are some of the cool ideas that you're seeing out there? I mean, Lydia, what are some of the interesting solutions you've seen people coming up with so far?
No, thank you. Allow me to share a live case that I'm dealing with today, because I have permission to share the live case. I recently met two young people, one a graduate of KU and another one of the medical school in Kenya. One is a doctor, the other one is an IT guru. You know, he's really good at what he does. And the two of them identified that there's a problem within the medical space of connecting doctors to the labs, to all those kind of things. And because she's got the medical mind, they then came up with this solution of developing a platform, an online platform, for tapping into doctor services, lab services, all those kind of things, and cutting the middleman, so to speak. And in the process, are able to bring down the cost of healthcare by about 50%. And I don't know whether that's the same problem we have in other African countries, but I can tell you in Kenya, and I know Uganda, because I'm in the market a lot, healthcare is a big issue because the government is not able to supply the right healthcare. So these young people came up with this brilliant idea, and they've developed this platform, but they have to go to market. We can say we are bootstrapping to get a product to market, but if you don't have a boot to strap, you've just come from university, it doesn't make sense. So currently they're in the market to raise $500,000 US, but they started from family. They went to family and friends, and have been able to bring the product to a usable space by using those few resources. So I see that, and there are very many of those cases. Right now, because they have a product that they can take to market, they're able to raise venture capital of $500,000, then to perfect the product and get it to market. That's a hope that we have in Africa. There are solutions, but they need to come from us. But one of the questions that I was asking these young people is, fine, you've got a product and it can sell, but how will I trust you with my money? Because, when I look at your governance structure, you're just two young people running around with briefcases and all that. How do I trust you? So they then need what I called adult supervision. And that's where the gray hairs in this room come in, because you're the people who know what needs to be, who can give that oversight, governance oversight, wisdom and knowledge to these people. And there are many ways that you can craft that. It could be sweat equity in what you put in them, so that you work with them to help them be trusted in the market. So, Dr. Ogutu, in short, solutions are there. We're seeing them in the market. We've got brilliant and wonderful minds out there, but we need to be there, as of the gray area needs to be there to help them and support them to get where they need to be.
This is really beautiful, because when you look at healthcare in the continent, people here don't go to hospital because they can't afford to, so they'll just wait until it's really too late. And then at that point is when we start trying to fundraise. And it's just the way we operate. But this particular startup you're talking about, they're trying to reduce the cost of healthcare, which is such a needed solution on the continent. And then talking of how we can plug in over here, you're telling us that they can come up with the brilliant ideas, nobody will trust them, they don't get the funds. But if we partner with them, if we work with them, provide the governance, and then it becomes possible for them to both succeed and tap into all these sources of capital. So think about how you can do it. I know in Notre Dame University in the States, they actually invest in the startups that their students come up with, and so they walk the journey with them. That's an example of how they do this. What about you, Philip? I know I mentioned some things I saw on your website. You have some very cool startups that you're working with. Could you share a couple of examples for us?
I'll start with what the line of work that we do. In venture capital, you go out to look for really exciting companies such as this one. For every 10 that we invest in, we go through about 1,000. And that is filtering through, asking these kind of questions. What's the kind of market? Is this a team? So you filter through. So in this last 6 months, we've gone through about 1,000 for what we're investing in. What you tend to find is in North Africa, particularly Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, and I'll add South Africa, you get a lot of startups that have IP, very hard IP that they can register. They're more out of research and development. They're engineers. They're coming to, one of them I'll talk about is one that does redesigned the wind blade for offshore energy. Another one is doing IoT devices in the apiary industry with bees. And so it's very hard research. When you come to sub-Saharan Africa, right from Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, across Ghana, Nigeria, it's more marketplace and payment systems. So everyone is in that space, which is I'll connect a farmer to the market. I'll do a transaction of your fees. There's so many of those fintechs, right? And it's so many of them. Now, one of the things, I was in Nairobi last week and interesting discussion with Safaricom. In their lending portfolio, I think the two major competitors are NCBA and what's the KCB one? M-Shwari. NCBA is 60%, M-Shwari is about, I think, 30%. Then 10% is for fintechs. And guess how many fintechs all want to do business with Safaricom? 200, right? So all these that we are really excited about are the smaller segment. Why am I bringing that up? Is because that's the problem we have here in our markets. The problem that South Africa has in terms of engineering, that's not our problem. So they're solving for our markets here. Unfortunately, because it's very low-hanging fruit, which is a marketplace, it's not easy. Today you can leave and you build a marketplace. If someone's doing it in Kenya, 9 out of 10 times, someone's doing it in Uganda, someone's doing it in Rwanda, and in Ghana. So it's hard to be very unique. And there's nothing that you find very robust or scalable, which is where in venture capital you're looking at something that is scalable. And that's why coming back to IP, what are we seeing in the market? Some that we've invested in Africa is looking at insurance using satellite imagery. So one company based out in Mali and Senegal, I think they're coming into Uganda as well. A farmer can say, look, I'll pay my premiums, but I want to insure my plot of land. If there is fire or there's drought, I get insured. And so using satellite imagery, the payouts happen quite quickly. So those are some of the interesting marketplace ideas. One other I'll point out too is in terms of alternative proteins. Today we are so heavily dependent on soya. Soya is one of the biggest drains on agricultural land in terms of water, in terms of fertilizer. And so people are looking at where do I get the same protein amount from other sources? And you're able to do that using other plants. I know one company, we didn't invest in them, they're a bit too early, but in Tanzania, doing this out of water lentils. Another one doing it out of, in West Africa, the larvae, I think the black fly, right? In Uganda, there's a huge source. We used to, our November period, we used to have what we call nsenene, the grasshoppers. That's a huge source, but no one's tapping how do we change this to alternative protein. So many of those, and I want to say solutions that my uncle, my grandmother can relate to, right? That affect them. Because what we are seeing outside in US and Europe, those are their problems. Ours are very different. And so before I go, I'll give one example in the electric mobility. I was in university many years ago, and at that time in Makerere, they were just trialing out the electric vehicle, and we all laughed. Today, Kira Motors is doing amazing. Now, who are students that I would like to engage? It's students going through that university who are now working with Kira Motors because they're going to be finding solutions that are local. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. I mean, those are really cool. I was hoping you would mention Senene. because yeah, it's an interesting concept, eating grasshoppers, and it's so traditional and all of that. You did mention venture capital, and I'm aware that not everyone might be aware what exactly that is. I wanted you to just briefly define or explain this whole venture capital concept.
Venture capital, put simply, is money you're willing to lose.
I don't think people will like venture capital if we define it like that. Tell us a bit more.
But I'll put it this way. You go to a bank, the first thing they say is, give us your house, right? We are all used to that one. In venture capital, we're saying, I am taking a bet on you. But at the back of it, out of every 10, venture capital knows that half of them are going to fail, right? You immediately know that half of them are going to fail. 2 of them may return 1 times your money. Then 1 or 2 are going to return 5 times your money to pay back for everyone else. And it's a simple thing. It's like if you had a house in one part of town and in another part of town, you know that that one I'm going to charge a bit more because it's going to cover the expenses in there. So it's very simply put. And it is, people say, look, people will take a bet on that because they say, I would rather get that than very low rates. And so we raise money from institutional investors who also are taking a bet on us, the venture capitals, to go and do that. And so with the same due diligence we do for the startups, the same is done to us to make sure, are these guys not going to run away with our money, but they're going to return it. So simply put.
Excellent. It reminds me again of that visit I made to Notre Dame. They have an incubator called the Idea Center. And I asked the head of the Idea Center, so what do you do? And he said something similar to yours. He said, I run businesses to the ground as fast as I can. So people come to me with these excellent ideas, and I try to make them fail as fast as I can. Because in any case, most of them do fail, and I do them a favor if I punch holes and show them that this is not going to work, and I spend as little money as possible. Like maybe a phone call to an alumni of Notre Dame who says, no, it wouldn't work. I've just spent $1 on the phone call, and I've saved them a lot of grief. But then if they do work, then they could return 1 times the investment, etc., etc. So he said 7 out of 10 in their case fail. But the 3 that do succeed, they'll make so much money, like even 10 times over whatever they invested. It makes up for all the other money that they lost. So it's an interesting field that you're in. Tony, what about you? I know we were talking this morning about incubators in Uganda and the one Stanbic specifically has got. So I'm sure you come across so many interesting ideas. What are some of the really cool ones that you've seen lately?
Okay, so what we can't run away from is the fact that COVID led to a lot of innovations. The last 2 years were just crazy in terms of what could come up. But also, it highlighted what we call the gig economy. You know, a lot of the time we have these traditional sectors or businesses, but the gig economy up to today is pretty much a cool economy. I think many of you have seen this very young TikToker who is now probably the most paid guy. I mean, he's just been taken over by the Qatar Football Federation to promote the World Cup. Just a post earns him close to $7 million US. One post. The gig economy was really highlighted.
Tell us a little bit more about the gig economy. What is the gig economy?
So the gig economy is ideally not your traditional economy where you have a set way of doing things. It's, you know, short-term opportunities that come your way. But the young people have found a way of creating these opportunities to even last longer. You have now social media influencers. All of these interesting innovations of how to tweet, what to tweet, coming to function like this and getting the message out even better than traditional media companies. All of that came up during the COVID time. But what was really interesting is how people innovated during COVID, and we saw that a lot. But also for us as incubators and accelerators, what happened was we also had to innovate in how we deliver our services. So traditionally, your training and coaching had to change, and we had now to go into the businesses and work out systems or come up with ideas and software that can support with business management and all of these things. But what was really interesting for us was, as a country, or if I look at our interventions in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, sectors like tourism came up in a different way. So what we traditionally had as, or the traditional way of doing tourism, having people fly in, a tour company takes them about, now young people were actually doing it differently, promoting local tourism amongst themselves, creating packages, niche packages, and creating applications that can actually create an opportunity for a young person to afford to go out into a national park or any of these exciting places. Traditionally, our local people, they always say you're a Ugandan, but you've never even been out of Kampala. When you travel out of Kampala, they ask you, have you been to the north? You say, yeah, I stopped in Bombo. Now, Bombo is 30 kilometers out of Kampala. But in your idea, that is how far you've traveled. But this created an opportunity where young people can actually see what's out there, enjoy or have the feel of it, and desire more. And now they're doing it all over East Africa. Someone, I remember in Kenya, tried out a trip from Kenya to Namibia a couple of weeks ago. And all of these things just show you how young people are thinking different. Now, can we hold them back to our old school way of thinking and curriculums? I don't think so. You just talked about how YouTube is a university. I have seen a lot of people learn how to code, for instance, off YouTube. I can't say I've tried to code because I failed miserably at it, but a lot of people are doing a lot of interesting things in that area. That's tourism. And again, coming together, pulling themselves together to create value for themselves. That's number one. Number two, agriculture. When we were all holed up in our houses, and for some of us in our countries where we were being hit with canes for moving past 7 o'clock, a lot of people were innovating on how to deliver food to households. Agriculture innovations came into play. You could see people starting up with their backyard gardens and finding ways of how to deliver to the next customer. Very interesting ways. We have a business that we incubated during that period. It's called Food to You. It's a fruits business. These guys started off slowly, and in fact, they delivered to me my first fruits when I was hit by the first COVID. And what was interesting is today that company is a $1 billion company. From a small company that was just working out of a small house to now working out of a warehouse. As I speak today, the same company is offering food and services to the oil and gas sector. Now, just think about that exponential growth, which probably would not have happened if COVID probably never happened for him to be able to innovate. So you see that innovation working in that area. But I think also what's really, really interesting about this whole thing, you talked about agriculture, where we have a model farm. And in there, we decided to support farmers to think differently. You don't have to have big, large spaces to do agriculture. Small spaces can still do. The idea of worms. I had never seen worms being consumed so fast by chicken, and this chicken becoming so big in 6 weeks. I mean, innovations just that, again, you say, your traditional mama can relate with, your traditional old man can relate with. And as we are now witnessing all of this happening in the agriculture space, you can now see issues of food security being taken differently. So someone in a small space can have a couple of chicken that can multiply quickly because of it. You see, when we talk about innovation, a lot of the time we think about technology and all of these things and whatever, but innovation can also just be worms, introduction of worms. Or we are now worried about fertilizer. Yeah, a lot of people are talking about organic fertilizers. We have introduced organic fertilizers that chase away a lot of things, act as pesticides and all of that. And these are just done traditionally. So, I mean, for us, that has been a very interesting one. And again, for many of the off-takers, because, a lot of these Muzungus who come to the oil camps always say, we want our food to be, we need to get it tested and all of these things. I mean, we can show them. We can show them comfortably that we have food that actually fits to the standard in terms of the fertilizers and the chemicals, or rather the inputs that are put in. But also what I've also seen happen, and especially in our space, and I'm glad you talked about it, when you go to a bank for money, I know I'm going to get a bullet for this, but when you go to a bank for money, a traditional African bank, I know my brother here just talked of, they'll ask you for your land title. Some banks will go the extra mile of even asking you for your grandmother's location, and you'll have to draw it on a map, just to make sure they know where to find you when you default. I know we're laughing, but this is the inconvenient truth, right? Now, for young people, we're talking about employability, opportunities. It's difficult. You go to a bank, they ask you for your father's name. Then they ask you for your father's national ID. Then they ask you for... Now, God forbid your father hasn't abandoned you, but if he has abandoned you, you're in a problem. Now, what we are encouraging is crowdfunding. How can we come together, common objective? You say you're in tourism, but you're 10 businesses who are bootstrapping, and Lydia talked about bootstrapping without a boot. You can come together, pull your resources together. Some people might have the ideas on how to do the business. Some people might have the money. Some people might have the vehicles. Some people might have ideas of where to go. Crowdfunding creates an opportunity for everyone. We've always said you're better off owning 5% of a $1 billion company than 100% of a 10 million shilling company in Uganda.
Tony, just unpack crowdfunding, because you're telling us the traditional thing is you go to a bank, you need X amount, you try and get all of that from that one bank, and they want to know everything about you. But you're saying there's another way of getting money that you're calling crowdfunding. Just explain what that is.
Absolutely. Let me just give you a simple example. Let's assume Tony Ottawa has land in my traditional village in Lira. This land is probably, say, 200 acres. But I don't have manpower, I don't have money to, put on the land. I can't mechanize it to make it more productive, so I'm stuck. What happens with crowdfunding is I can go out and ask people out there, all of you here, to just give me whatever money you have in your pockets. Of course, not all of you will have the same amount of money. Even the Bible is clear on that. We're not all equal. But I mean, you give me what you have. And what we do is we work together, or I use that money to make my farm productive. And then when I start making money out of that farm, I give you back your money and more based on how much you've put in.
Beautiful. So I don't need to get that 1 million from one bank. I can get 100,000 from someone, 200,000 from someone else, 50,000 from someone. Before I know it, I have this whole team of supporters and I have all the money.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So Tony, you've actually brought us into the next segment of this discussion, which is there are all these changing trends. They're like new ways of doing things, so new ways of getting finance. You talked of new ways of working, like the business model. How can we make it cheaper? Tourism, making it accessible to the local tourists. There are so many things that are changing. So why don't you, Philip, just tell us a bit about emerging trends, future directions. What do you think, what do you see happening?
I think entrepreneurship is, will create the jobs, right? Which is how do we support them? And I think, if you allow me, I want to see where a lot of the audience here today are in the university. When we traditionally look at who are the main actors that need to help an ecosystem economy thrive, there is markets, there's governments, and the third leg is the academia, right? Now, one of the things I've seen in other places, again in North Africa and South Africa, is some of the universities saying, look, how do I participate in that? What do we need to do? Because a lot of it is in the IP. I studied computer science and mathematics at Makerere, and there was a lot of innovation. But the challenge is, how do you get those good ideas out to market? And that vehicle is not yet there in terms of what we call commercialization of those ideas. I'll tell you, there are some amazing ideas sat in your universities, in research departments. What other universities are doing that I see is happening is universities come together and say, all right, we're going to put up our own fund, and then we'll now come and sell that to who are the actual venture capitalists that want to get involved in this one. And they'll take a share of what they produce. And that's encouraging some of the researchers, the professors. Because again, like I mentioned, a lot of this is happening mainly in North Africa and South Africa, where again, their education system has encouraged this one. What we see across sub-Saharan Africa, I'll say in East Africa, what I know well, is there's no way to commercialize that. Those ideas are not coming out. So I think there's a huge opportunity to be able to say, how do we get these ideas? There are researchers in proteins. There are researchers in biology. There are researchers in engineering. All the work we're doing in the clean energy. A lot of the professors know this. They've done this. They can do it. We have the skill. It is how do we support them to get out? And the example I'll always point to is the Kira bus. There was a lot of support there. What are other areas that we can do the same? So that to me is a trend that I see happening and that I would want to happen, because it starts to rather than what I would call the technology from the north come and then we're just acclimatizing it. We can do this locally. It's no longer rocket science. And so that to me is where I see that going.
Beautiful. We do research all the time, and you're talking about commercializing that research. There's a paper, I forget who wrote it, but it's called the garbage cans model, and its claim is that universities are constantly generating solutions to problems that still don't exist. So they are sitting on shelves somewhere, and if you wanted a solution, you just need to pull them off the shelves. So it's like we generate solutions that are looking for problems rather than the other way around. Very interesting concept. So we are sitting on so many solutions and innovations that could be applied to current problems if we just knew how to make that connection and commercialize. And I love the idea of universities starting their own investment fund to fund the startups that you see from your students, and then attract venture capitalists like yourselves to invest in that fund and to get a share of the proceeds that you'll make when these businesses start making a profit. Lydia, what do you think are the emerging trends, future directions we could take?
No, thank you. One of the most exciting things that we are seeing in the market is actually what Tony was talking about, especially in crowdfunding, both locally within the various markets, but also internationally. And that is changing the way funding, the traditional, like they rightly said, traditionally you had to go to the bank. I like to think of myself as a recovered banker, or a recovering banker, where you just, it's so difficult. But now we are becoming, even financial services, if there's one place where I've always found a lot of stagnation, it's within financial services, where we say money is risky, so I have to always think about the risk and protect it. But that is changing pretty quickly. You'll find that there are different kind of funding opportunities that are in the market today. We have the traditional banks. We have also the traditional venture capital, because venture capital is now maturing and it's starting to become more the traditional funding. Then we start having these more creative lenders, so to speak, you'll find that they are the non-bank financial institutions which take much, much more risks than the traditional banks, because much as we would like to be funded through equity, any equity investor will ask, how much am I leveraging on the equity that I put in this business? So the next trend then becomes, if I've got an equity through venture capital, how do I leverage that to give a better return? So we are seeing some non-traditional, non-bank financial institutions or services. Some of it, I would say not the best, because when you look at mobile lending maniac that we have in Africa, might be good, but is it beneficial in the long run to the... I come from the impact financing side of things, so I'm always asking myself, this funding, how much impact is it creating? Is it creating value to the economy in the long run, or is it just giving value to this person today or to the investor today? So it's more starting to think of what kind of impact financing can we see in the space, which is not as prohibitive, can take more risk than the traditional one can, but it's always good to combine both equity and debt funding. I don't think you can divorce the two.
Lydia, actually yesterday when I was chatting with you, you told me you're very passionate about impact financing. Just tell us a bit more about that, like how different is it from, and you called yourself a recovering banker. So something made you feel like the traditional banking wasn't doing it for you, and then you went into this space. Could you tell us the difference and the challenges? Speak a bit about impact financing.
I think about it as funding with a heart, lending with a heart, where it's not just about the financial returns at the end of the day. You can make that 5 times return on any investment, but what effect has it had on, downscale to everybody that you've impacted? If it's your employees, the investment that you've made in this institution, how has it made your staff force better than it was? If it's a public that you're serving, because you're serving a bigger public, does it do good or harm? I'm sorry to always keep going to what I call the payday lenders. The ones who will come, lend to you money for a day, charge you an interest rate of 50%. You do business, all right. But at the end of the day, has it done good in improving the general economy and the general outlook? So that's the way I define impact financing, as lending with a purpose. But it has to be very intentional. I think what the core about impact financing is it's intentional. Whereas I'm developing or crafting my fund, I'm telling myself very intentionally, instead of taking a return of, let's say, an IRR of 25%, I will settle for an IRR of 10% because I know this 15% margin here is the impact that I've created.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Tony, before we go we open up to the audience, what are these emerging trends? You have some others. You had mentioned some earlier.
No, I think maybe just coupled to that is data. Data is king. Now you can't do anything without going back to data. Before traveling here, most Ugandans know that we've been asking ourselves, what's the data on Ebola before we travel out? But data has become king. And it again goes back to the 80-20 principle, focusing on the 20% area that will give you 80% of the results. But that can only be done with data. So data has become very, very key, and I think for me that's one trend. But finally, and again, something that we always keep sliding or ignoring, people. People. Again, the last 2-3 years have taught us empathy. Empathy has become one important aspect of how we deal with things, how we relate. But people. The moment you take care of people, people will take care of you. And that's very important. You can innovate, you can do whatever, you can change your curriculum, but if your people are not aligned and your people are not in sync, that's when they always say, Inshallah, we shall let God decide. But I think at the end of the day, it's people. Thank you.
Yeah, I quite agree with you. I think a lot of the problems that we face, the solution actually exists conceptually. I think of it as floating in the air, waiting for somebody who's courageous enough to just reach out and grab it. And the minute it's presented to us, we feel so stupid, like I could have thought of that, but we just didn't get into that space. And then when it comes to implementation, again, if you have the right kind of people, I think, Philip, you were talking about efficiency and having people who can actually deliver, and that kind of human power that we should have in the market. And that's where universities come in. We actually prepare those people. So we're going to open this discussion to the audience. Feel free to raise your hands, and we'd like to know your views. You can, of course, direct questions to the audience as well. So we'll start with our first round of questions. I'd like to take, say, 3 questions, and then any of you can address it, and then we'll take another round of questions. So who goes first?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria, and I'm from Carnegie Mellon University, Africa. I don't think I have much of a question to you, but more of a challenge to everyone in the room. Something that I'm super passionate about is creating spaces for experimentation, spaces for failure, right? So I was talking to some of the attendees yesterday at lunch, and I said entrepreneurship in Africa is a luxury. Saying that from the point of view of someone choosing to do entrepreneurship, it being a luxury. Yes, we are very much an entrepreneurial continent, but most of the people who are entrepreneurs are not doing it by choice. It's either a side hustle or there's nothing else to do but entrepreneurship. And so for the people who do choose to be entrepreneurs and are super successful at it and who VC funders are looking at, to be honest, are very few, right? A lot of the people who are entrepreneurs are doing mom and pop shops and things like that, that I don't think you would deem as scalable enough or investable, right? So I would also assume that one of the challenges that you're facing as VCs is a pipeline of people who are strong enough for you to invest in. So the challenge goes back to us as higher education institutions. How are we building that pipeline? Are we creating spaces for students while they're still students to experiment, to fail, to start again? I like the idea from the idea people, wherever you went to, you know, do we have people in our institutions who can help entrepreneurs run the ideas to the ground, right? And tell them, in 2 to 3 months, this is not gonna work, do something else. And for me, this is space for them to realize, well, I think I can become an entrepreneur, or no, this is not for me, but you've cultivated an entrepreneurial mindset out of that at the end of the day. So not much of a question, but more of a challenge. How are we creating spaces for people to try and fail? And with time, in maybe 5 years, we'll have built strong, resilient entrepreneurs who are, you know, when we're talking about who are unicorns in Africa, who do not necessarily have to have a certain face for them to raise funding, if you know what I mean. So African ventures by Africans that in 5, 10 years will be able to say, we have our unicorns from Africa.
Thank you for bringing that up. And you see, the example I'd given was Notre Dame University. But now, just thinking about it, I realize there's an even better example of a university that allows their students to fail. And in this case, every student is given an opportunity, and that's Ashesi. I remember talking with Angela, Prof. Angela here. Maybe Prof. Angela, you want to just make a comment before we go to the next question? Just tell us what Ashesi does in terms of investing in every single student to start a business and allow them to fail.
So at Ashesi, first year, first semester, students are, all students, whether they're engineers, majors or computer science major, doesn't matter. But all students, first semester, are taught the principles of entrepreneurship, modeling, they go through design thinking, and so they're giving the foundation of what entrepreneurial thinking encompasses. Then in the second semester of that same first year, they are given the opportunity to actually implement. And as Vincent was saying, we give them the opportunity, a small loan, and they start a business. It could be porridge in a cup or braiding hair or all those kinds of different things.
How much do you give them, roughly? Just an idea.
Roughly $50.
$50.
But they pay it back. So it's the same money that we're recycling for the most part. And some pay with interest and some don't pay back. But the intent is for them to pay it back. And like you're saying, those who do not pay back, those who do pay with interest, a little bit more make up for that. So anyway, the second semester, they're given the opportunity to actually implement the business that they have been learning about or creating in the first semester. And by the second or third year, about 35% are at their third iteration of that business. And so in a way, the entrepreneurial mindset is inculcated in them, and they have the opportunity, like you were saying, to fail in a safe space. Like I said, 35% are still in the business by second or third year. Thank you.
Pumlani Kontwan from South Africa, and I'm representing Allen Gray here. And I'm very interested in this conversation, and I wonder if the ecosystem in Africa is still too conservative or kind of providing cosmetic solutions when maybe there's a call to be much more radical. And one of those areas, for example, is my observation that there's very few patient capital funds that are not looking quickly for these 5Xs and 10Xs. And to the extent that experimentation is important, there's an argument that if you want to drive solutions to the ground fast, then put in the money to back that up. And we look around in the ecosystem and we just don't see that. We see VCs as sharks looking to kind of convert and make money quite quickly, which also leads to this obsession for investing in low tech as opposed to deep tech.
Let me actually direct that to Lydia, because I think what you talked about, impact investment, speaks to that, where you can take bigger risks than the traditional venture capitalists. How big is this sector? Are you the exception? Are you becoming the norm?
It's a growing sector. It's always been talked about. And like I said, the biggest challenge is being intentional about it. If you go to all the big DFIs, who are the biggest source of our fundings in the world, they always say, we are giving you money from our impact pot.
Tell us who a DFI is.
Okay, development financial institutions, the IFCs and those kind of people. They always tell us as impact investors that we are giving you money from our impact pot. But really, they still ask you for a return of the 25% and that kind of thing. So it's a tightrope that everyone is walking right now. But I think we are getting there, because the message is getting across that good businesses are not necessarily very high return investments if you're going to make a difference where you are. And I can fully empathize with what he's saying. VCs being seen as sharks. That's the biggest, if you ask me for the biggest disadvantage of our space, it's the fact that sometimes we don't have the patience. We have maybe close-ended funds for 10 years, so I have to get in and I have to give a return to my investors within those 10 years. However, if you start this from, I am intentional about what I want to do. That's what I was saying, the core definition of that fund is that intention. So it's a growing industry. It's not fully caught on, but we are getting there. We are working at it.
Beautiful, beautiful. And yes, we have a question right in the middle.
Yes. Thank you very much. This session is really very great, and especially I was looking at the synopsis, meaning that our target should be our students, and you have stated it clearly. I think one of the people was saying that there is no great professor who is greater than the products you have produced. So which means your products are the ones who make us great. Now, the issue that I have is what Lydia talked about. One, trust and talent. I look at the mode of India, the Indians. I'm sorry I'm not whatever, but I'm just giving a comment, so don't take me on. The Indians come in Africa. I've seen them in Uganda. They don't carry anything. Just come with their brains, go in someone's shop, a fellow Indian, work. Within 1 year, they already have a chain of stores. They have products. They are now also having their shops. And you wonder whether that model cannot work for us Africans. So almost every Indian who comes in Africa prospers. What is the problem with us prospering in our own country? What is it that has gone wrong? Is it the issue of trust and the talent? How do we build it? Me, I would love to see really, let us really look for solutions. How can we go about it? Because number two is the issue of standards. The issue of standards. We do products, we want to go to international market. But the standards they set are too high for the Africans. If I may say, I don't know whether it is political, economy, or something like that, but they say export meat. By the time it reaches there, your meat is not what? It's not up to the standard. The other day it also happened with Uganda and Kenya, who were exporting maize. When it reached in Kenya, I think at one stage Kenya had enough. They said the maize is full of aflatoxins. So it was rejected. Now when the hunger strike, they said, then I'll bring all the maize that you have in Uganda. Now you wonder what is it that has changed? So can we really have standard that we can operate on? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're asking if why can't we do what the Indians are doing? I actually see Somalis doing the same. And you know, that's an African country and they're very entrepreneurial. They'll go to a township. My village, right now the shops are now mostly Somalis. They've kind of taken over Bondo town. Philip, you actually raised this issue of talent and standards yourself. Do you have a suggestion? How do we move forward here? How do we promote talent? How do we raise standards?
You raise a very good question, so I must say that. But I think let's start why. And it's one word, discipline. The Indians will go 10,000 miles from where they live, but the same discipline, the same culture, they will keep it. They will earn 10 shillings a day or so on each product, and they live on 2. Our students that get out, immediately, they were in their father and mother's house being driven to school. And so as soon as I get out of school, I too must drive. So the first thing you go to is, I need to buy a car, I need to buy. And we get into this debt trap, right? So there's very little discipline. Discipline at a national level, at the ground level. Discipline is one thing. The other people that are equally as disciplined are the Chinese. Discipline makes or breaks a nation. Regardless of how many resources you have, it is down to discipline. And so unfortunately, we haven't got that culture yet. And so, again, it's not something I want to throw back to universities to do because you can't teach that in universities. But it is, how is society forming? And a week ago, one of my old schoolmates was on a similar panel in Uganda. And he mentioned something that I had never thought about. He said, in economics, we are all taught 3 main issues. It is land, labor, and capital. He said, but you know what? In Africa, and he pointed to Uganda particularly, he said, there's one they forgot. Trust. How do I trust the product that you've done is good for me, right? How do I trust that you will be there on time? I did entrepreneurship in Uganda, and I'll tell you this, as an entrepreneur, things will hit you the moment you say I'm an entrepreneur, because your people will be late, the product's not enough, that 45 kilo bag of cement is actually 42, the beans are not that, you've seen, there's so much of those kind of things. So you wonder, why? And so it's back to the culture. So to answer you quite simply, it's one word, discipline. And I think if we can build a cadre, a lot of students who are saying, no, this should be different. Nations have been built. I like the fact there's a story it's told. Catapult is a Norwegian fund. But they've spent centuries. They were not always, they were also poor at one point in time. They were agrarian. But it's from one generation to the next that they're saying, we're doing this for the next one. The next one will do the next. So it's a discipline thing. So I think, to answer your point, that is why they succeed.
You know, Philip, by the way, I hope you were listening because he said, I don't think you universities can do too much about this. So I don't know whether you agree. Are you ready to take the challenge? Because he's saying we need to teach this discipline.
My name is Damlala Fashoranti. I'm the chief catalyst at Precol Academy Rwanda. So I just want to take it on from the very last point about how do the students have the ethics that they need to be able to survive. But I think we should take it a little bit downwards to the homes or, to the families. Because even before they get to higher institutions, they have come from the home. So how do we build the right ethics from the homes? But there's something else I also wanted to mention about the homes. So we have the informal sector, where people have been doing businesses forever. And many of them are successful in their own way or, within their own size. But I see that many times we don't recognize them as being successful. We feel that they don't know the term sheets, they don't know the spreadsheets and all of those kind of things. Why are they not mentors, even in the schools? Many of the students that are in the schools have seen their parents do businesses from when they were young, and they had to send them to school through those same businesses as well. And they could be small businesses forever. Yet, they send their students to schools, with all of the money that they are making from there. Why do we think that these kind of parents or these kind of businesses that has not grown so big cannot give insights or do not have the lessons that students actually need in the schools? Another thing we have experienced, because we are in the intersection between the institutions and the students, between the industries and the schools. So students come to us sometimes and they say, well, I want to start a business, but I really don't know what to do. My lecturers have never done any business. They teach me business, but I understand it's just theory. They really don't know how these things work. But the question we are asking is, why do the schools feel that the informal sector cannot actually come into the school to teach some of those things or share examples of how they run businesses that students can actually learn practically from them? Something else we've seen is that we want students to go for internships with the companies. Why can't they not go to regular businesses to do internships? And we still see that as real internships. Something that I observed, so I was born in Nigeria and lived a lot there. We see students finishing from the university, but going to the informal sectors to learn a trade after going to the university. So we're asking ourselves, so these guys are valuable after all, but we still don't recognize them as valuable. How can we begin to think about a shift in recognizing that sector and maybe even bringing them into these kind of conversations where they could get some grants, get some, better advice, how they could scale up. Some of them don't want to scale up, but they have a lot of resident wisdom that we are not leveraging on as VCs, as, education collabs and things like that. Then one other thing I also wanted to mention is about the culture and the values. I think this goes back to the families again. And I'm throwing this out here because I know there are so many parents here. You are teachers, but at the same time, you are parents. And we are all busy. We want to make money and send them to schools. But at the same time, how can we involve the parents more? It's possible to say, well, we'll bring the parents to our institutions once a year or twice a year. Many of them will not still be able to attend. Is there a strategy we can use that we don't need to wait for them to come to the schools to see that they are actually part of the bigger strategy that is helping the kids to develop the character they need and the skill set they need as well? The last point I wanted to mention is career capital. So it's very easy for us to say that, a student will be trained on business and then we give them this kind of grant and then they can go ahead and do things. But we cannot remove the place of experience in almost anything you want to do. So I can give a practical example here. So I run a business.
We'll have to be quick, huh?
Yes,
I want
just
three
last point.
others. Okay, great.
Just last point about the career capital. So I run a business, but at the same time, I work for a company. Even when the business does not make money, because I have career capital to work, I have that kind of income to continue to run the business. So how do we also bring this shift to students and even any other young person to say that you don't have to completely be this or completely be that, but you can have the skill sets to work, at the same time the skill set to run businesses, because now you would employ people and all of those kind of things without making them feel that you are running helter-skelter. Those are my points. Thanks.
Okay, great. So since we're running out of time, I'm going to I call them rapid fire. So just ask your question, like 30 seconds. We'll try and respond to as many as we can once we've collected them. So let's have a very quick round of questions, 30 seconds each. Let's start with you, Rose Dodd.
I think that when we mentioned fruits and vegetables from Uganda going to other parts of the continent, I think we will all agree that visiting other African countries really, opens our eyes to what opportunities are available and what these countries are really good at. And I feel maybe that's one of the things that's missing in our education, finding ways to get our students exposed to what exists in other parts of the continent. Because I would say, definitely, when I started to travel around in other countries in Africa, I was actually very surprised at some of the things that are happening, and what is available in countries other than Ghana. So perhaps trying to find ways to bring that to our students would, when you're now thinking about entrepreneurial ventures, to start, what possibilities are there, what different markets are available outside of your own. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalie, you're on the same table. Just pass.
Quickly, I think, just a point to add on to what Rose was saying, actually, I think the problem is, to your point about standards, if I was trying to import something to Ghana, I would have a harder time with my Rwandan passport than if I came with my Canadian passport. So that fundamentally comes down to the trust we have in ourselves. So some of it is our fault, but some of it comes down to our colonial mindset, that unless something comes from the West, it is not good enough. And actually, it's the same for in our institutions. If I went to Kenya, and I'm going to pick on some randomly, and I said, Prof. Gudu, give me an appointment, he would look at my last name. I'm using you as an example. Look at my last name, look at where I'm coming from, and dismiss it. Maybe he might give me to one of his research officers, right? But if I came and my name was Nathalie Gaston, with my Canadian passport, even if I was a small person from a small company in Canada, he would meet me himself. And these are universities. I see that all the time, right? And it really astounds me because at Kepler, all of the great partnerships we have are with African universities. And so if someone says, hey, I'm from Ghana, I open the email immediately. If you say, hey, I'm from the US, I'll send it to Bailey and say, have a look and see if this is worth our while, right? So fundamentally within ourselves, we are still, we claim Pan-Africanism, but we're not really Pan-African, right? And fundamentally, like I buy all my products, my beauty products from Ghana. And I tell that to students all the time. They're like, oh, how your skin? And I'd be like, go to Ghana. They have all the best share, right? But are we modeling these things that we see on panels? We are not. And the last thing I want to say about the informal sector, part of it is around our regulators, and they're in the room, so I hope they're listening, to how we can add informal internships and other things that would help us. But fundamentally, the issue with mom and pop shops, they are very important, and I think this idea of only tech companies is a real problem. In Rwanda, it's my core issue. Whenever I talk to young people, I say, do not talk to me about a tech idea. Look in your environment, what else can you do? Tech is an enabler. Do not talk to me about having a tech app. I dismiss that idea immediately. But the reason we're pushing for entrepreneurship, it's about job creation. In my previous role, I would look at how many jobs are we creating in these new sectors that we're announcing. And I would spend time as an academic institution working with the Rwandan government to plan around the talent related to these areas we're going into, right? This is a thing that we can do as institutions. Help the government to say, these targets that you have, look at the talent that would be required. But are these mom and pop shops creating jobs? So they have their place, they have their value, absolutely, within the economy. But we need to be thinking about companies that create jobs, that have a wider impact to absorb all these young people that are coming at our doors. And institutions like ours have a role to play around thinking through what is creating jobs. And for me, if we ever open a fund, it will always be invested in companies that create jobs, because that has a longer-term impact. I wanted to say those two things.
Thank you very much. And I think there were some two ladies there in that general direction, and just very quick. And then there was some on this side, but we'll have to be really quick so that they can respond.
Okay.
Yes,
just
very quick.
Just very quickly, just wanted to add something to what Tony said about standards. Many of our young people will come up with all these innovations, but have no idea about the standard. And I keep telling them that, you know, once you go out of your home area to public, you are now doing for government. So there are other rules there that you should know. Now, I'll give you a vivid example. We've had I work with agro-processors. So they were bringing a juice onto the market. It looks beautiful. So I said to them, do you know the standards? And they didn't know. So we got the standard and we helped them to test the juice. You could not believe how much dirt was in that juice. So the standards are not only the rules of the game, but they protect the consumer. That's something that these young people should always remember. Thank you.
When I came in the morning, I just to represent my Vice Chancellor, but I'm so glad out of a busy schedule she managed to make it. My question goes to Mr. Philip and Mrs. Lydia. You shared an experience that there are two young people, one who was in the health sector and the other in IT, who came up with a technology and an app to come up with solutions. And Mr. Philip shared how the electrical technology with cars these days and how students in the 80s was so hard and it was fun. So my question is around, we have graduates and some of them have got very good projects. And some of these projects come as solutions of the questions that are in the market today. So, but when you look at, it's around academia and industry. When we have these projects, they are funded. Some of these students go for even international competitions. They get very good awards. These projects are really very important, very useful. But when they come back and they have graduated, who recognizes them? Where does that knowledge go? And how do we ensure that these solutions they come up with, they are going to meet the questions in the labor market? Another one is when you look at how the companies or the industries get these students, first of all, look at them and like, oh, you have just graduated. Oh, it's just something, but the trust, how do we ensure that these projects are coming up with solutions that are needed at the labor market, are really valued, are really given the weight they deserve, and how do we ensure that these students, the projects can continue on to be the light and also be very captured by the industries? It also comes in as a question, how do we strengthen industry and academia in terms of empowering, in terms of working with them? I think that, in my thinking, I think that academia, it's higher learning, we should come up with solutions to where we are. If University A is here, and there's, for example, a trade that is being taught, and there's a company B that has those, there could be a way we can get the best to solve those questions. So I'd like to share with you, how can we do it best as academia? How do we get these skills and these good projects that students work on, not to just be in our drawers or in our universities, but get out there, people get to know them, and maybe strengthen also the collaboration. Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen, I would really have loved to keep taking questions. I can see Bailey, I can see Olive, but I'd like them to actually try and respond very quickly as you also give your parting shots. So give a comment, react to what you've just heard, and also give us your final parting shots. Let's start with you, Lydia.
Okay. No, thank you. And fantastic questions and comments from the floor, because this is where the rubber meets the road, of, you know, where that good idea can actually be actualized into delivering the value that we hope can make a difference. And, you know, she asked what we do. It really lies on us, because as we all agree, these are young people, need to be looked at out there in the market as people with value that they bring. So for the people within the university who actually see these great ideas, the responsibility comes back to you on how do you help from a point of understanding to bring it to market. And it's also the responsibility on us in the market to say, if a professor comes to me with an idea from a student, I will listen very keenly, because I know it's been vetted. But then I'll ask you to also work with these students and bring that additional, like I always call it, you know, adult supervision to make sure that this is actually done in the right way that brings results. Just as a closing, it's such a delight to see universities starting to think this way, because we can't keep pushing our children, because these are our children. Now I talk as a mother. We spend so much in resources, time. I remember one of the professors yesterday saying how he's taking his daughter to medical school, and after 5 years, he wants a return on his investment. That's it. The return might be in you wanting to see your child settled and doing well in life. That's the biggest return. So you as the parents who are teaching these children in these universities, how do we help them get out and get absorbed in the marketplace? And us as the marketplace, how do we make sure that these institutions, especially the venture capital institutions that we are talking about, how do we get them to the next level of equity investment? We'll not get into details about that, but so that we can scale them up and they can absorb more and more. I had a number yesterday. I don't know in how many years we'll need to create 12 million jobs a year in Africa. Now, where will these jobs come from? They'll come from us making sure that these ventures are funded, they grow, they absorb more capital, they absorb more people, and then they create more employment. So we have a chain reaction that we all need to be thinking about if we have to create 12 million jobs in another 5 years in Africa.
Thank you very much. Philip, what about you? What's your reaction and your parting shot?
First, if I may say, in the name, at the Education Collaborative, I must commend the universities for doing that. Absolutely. And I'll say why. Part of the reasons why it's very difficult to do business across Africa. I went to Makerere. I did not go to, none of my classmates were Ghanaian. None of my classmates were from Senegal or from Botswana. It was difficult. So when I think of going to Botswana, the first thing that comes to mind is, who do I know there? How do I even start? The culture. And so it is easier to go where? The UK, right? And the same. So this kind of audience, I think, is really a big refresher. I hope that this will trickle down, and I'm hopeful that even as you come together, your students come together. It is very important that they do that. I think ALU do a good job here, and I think Carnegie Mellon as well, and other universities as well. But that's the one I see here. You need to get a lot of them going to the same, sleep in the same dorm, getting to hear about their cultures. That's very important. That way they get to do business. So when I'm in a dormitory and with someone from Ghana, I can tell them about my fruit. I can tell them, look, I eat in senene. Ask what's that? That's how you get the collaboration, right? The second one I'll say is on the patient capital. To the gentleman's question here. There is
catalyst,
no,
he called himself.
The patient capital is not there. And I always like to tell some of the startups that we invest in on the side, I say, buyer beware. Venture capital is not, it comes with its read the fine print, right? And there have been many sad stories. Patient capital is what we need at universities. Now, that is something the market's willing to collaborate, say, how do we do this? How do we make sure there's enough patient capital that will allow some of these students to move from $50 to $100 to $1,000, seeing them grow? Because venture capital, I like to say it this way, is they sit at the table and wait for the food to come to the table. Someone needs to go to the kitchen to make the food with the startups, if you know what I mean. Someone needs to roll up sleeves. Someone needs to go there, fight with them, figure things out. If you come too early, it's a big problem. So venture capital likes to sit at the table, both venture capital and private equity as well. The last one I'll say is on the point you raised in terms of many of the students have really great ideas. I think this is, again, what I pointed out earlier, an opportunity for universities. Many universities around the world now have intentionally built what they call the commercialization departments that will actually actively seek what is happening in our research institutes. Who do we know out there? Go and bring real companies, not the DFIs and NGOs. No, they'll always be there. It's who are real market players. If someone's done an innovation in a battery source, go and get Ampersand, go and get Kira. If someone's done something in protein, right, go and get Bitco, or all these guys who are in the milling. You need to intentionally do that, make that collaboration. And unfortunately, the market is moving so fast they're not going to say, let me go back to university. That's where I see it is the role in the universities to be able to create those linkages. And I think as you create those linkages, the market sits up and says, this is interesting. It's actually solving a problem that I had here. I had to go and buy it from maybe Indonesia or so. Actually, I can get seat here. That to me is a space where you can create those academic and market collaborations.
Wonderful comments. And Tony, it's up to you to wrap this up.
I think mine is just going to be very short. You've all said everything. First of all, it's just to thank each and every one of you for giving us an audience. You know, it's very difficult to listen to people like some of us in terms of what we've been talking about. But you're all academics, and I would encourage you to probably read some 2 interesting books I have come across that I think would, kind of like provoke you as well. The first one is Good to Great by Jim Collins. A very interesting book looking at how and why companies, some stay good and some stay great, or some get great. But also why the great ones fall. I always say big brands are fallible. Everyone has been saying Asesi, 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 Asesi. But if Asesi doesn't continue doing it right, it could probably fall. Big brands are fallible. We all know the Nokia story. It was a nice thing to have your Nokia on your belt. Many of you know, we're all gray, you remember those days. Nokia is no more. So big brands are fallible. So Good to Great is a very interesting book I'd like you to read. The second one is start with the why. Why do we do what we do? And this very interesting book by Simon Sinek, I'll just read this. Every organization, now this is about the what. Every organization on the planet knows what they do. These products or what they do in terms of services, they know. You all know what you do. The how. Some organizations know how they do it. These are the things that make them special or set them apart from their competition. They know the how. But what's interesting is very few organizations know why they do what they do. Why is not about making money. That's a result. Why is a purpose, cause, or belief. It is the very reason why your organization exists. I just want to leave you with that as a way of a parting shot, and I hope we can reflect on that. And I want to say asante sana. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you focus on the impact you want to have and how you want to help other people, then actually the money will come to you. People will see that this is somebody I can trust. Natalie was telling me the same about Kepler, that the money comes to them because people see that they're ready to use that to help others, which is in the very spirit of what the Education Collaborative is about. We're helping each other, and when they see that we're genuine about it, we really want to impact Africa through this collaboration, then we're going to go really fast. So I'd like to thank, I think on behalf of all of us, what Ashesi has done as we congratulate you on your 20th anniversary as well. And so we've learnt a lot from the 3 of you. I hope you've all got takeaways, things you're going to implement when you go back there, and we've been challenged, and we've also been empowered. So let's give them a very big round of applause. Thank you very much.